Greetings. Happy, let me see, Tuesday of the first week of ordinary time. The Christmas decorations came down. Very, very sad. At this point, I'm always I'm melodramatic about everything, but I'm like, is this the last Christmas I'll ever have? I'm very, very attached to every bulb, cherub, angel, little piece of tinsel. But anyway, they came down and we kind of got cheated out of the great. Usually, I think we have some time between Epiphany and the baptism. They came back to back, so everything's kind of speeded up. This actually for Advent and then this coming year. I mean, Easter is March 31st, so Ash Wednesday coming up. I'm going to be in Guatemala, which is another whole story. But anyway, I had a my usual non-eventful slash eventful to me week. I wrote a piece for Magnificat about Monsignor, actually servant of God, Bernard J. Quinn, who I'd never heard of and was a huge champion of the Black Catholics of Brooklyn, New York. Uh, Beloved figure. Just submitted a piece to Angelus on this huge gem show that's at the Natural History Museum in LA, and I talked about the gems. They're all these huge gems. They're all at least 100 carats, which apparently is like gigantic in the gem world. Um, but I, what that evoked for me was the many, many novels and short stories I've read and films I've seen where jewels figure prominently and, of course, are the downfall, the ruin of all involved. These juicy stories. So I wrote about those, which was kind of fun, also challenging. I've been to Mexico this morning. Yes, I live in Tucson. It's not terribly far to the border. Tucson, as you may or may not know, is in deep southern Arizona. So I go down there. I have this dentist down there. So it's this whole thing. Nogales, huge apparently fentanyl smuggling center. But you park in there's a Nogales, Arizona, and then you walk across the border and it's Nogales, Mexico. But they let anybody in. Like you don't even have to show ID when you walk into Mexico, which seems strange to me. But anyway, and my doctor, Dr. Tapia, Tapia, sounds like a fish, right? I guess that's tilapia or something like that. Anyway, I had a cleaning and I got a clean bill of health, which just made my heart soar with joy. It's also very cold here. We had hard freeze warning last night. I had to bring my succulents in because the succulents get cold. They'll just like die. They get all spongy. It's not good. So that's just some of the many kind of side exciting things. But I just wanted to talk about a couple books that I'm reading. I haven't been watching movie. A Criterion Channel has to me, really kind of not terribly compelling lineup for January. Not that that's not the only place I watch movies by a long shot, but they do have a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock. I watched this one, Sabotage, that I'd never seen before. Robert Cummings, I think, and it's like you can see the North by Northwest coming up. It's got the Statue of Liberty instead of, coming up, decades later. It's got the Statue of Liberty instead of Mount Rushmore. But it's a real. It kind of almost brings a tear to your eye because it's a really the it's a movie in a sense about the great ideals and the promise of the United States of America, how all around the world people look to us, and of course it was made in the 1930s. Um, so, but it's all. Hitchcock is just an absolute master. So his stuff is always fun to watch. I did watch that, but what I've been reading, and I just finished, is a wonderful memoir, yet another prison memoir. This woman had unbelievable spirit and a sense of humor, no bitterness. I don't know how these people do it. It's called Gray. Gray is the color of hope. Irina Rathushinskaya is how it's, excuse me, Rathushinskaya is how it's pronounced. Gray is the color of hope. And she lived 1954 to 2017. She was a Russian poet. She wasn't even really, I mean, she's a human rights champion, but she didn't do anything overtly against the government at all. Someone sort of ratted her out, or they just decided, oh, you're a poet, you need to go to a brutal, punitive prison camp. And she got sentenced to the maximum sentence. I think it was 7 years hard labor, 5 years internal exile. She ended up serving almost 4 years, almost died in there. But she's put in this camp with all uh, political dissidents, and the camaraderie and the absolute integrity is simply astounding. I mean, I just always feel like if you just even put me in a place that was under like 50 degrees, I would completely like fold and rat out everybody. I don't know how these people, but anyway, here's one. I mean, it's just gnarly. They're constantly confiscating all their stuff. They have like some little teeny space that they have to have put everything they own, all their books, papers, and they're constantly that they'll come in and take all the stuff. But it's freezing cold. They're constantly put them in this horrible. I mean, the place is bad enough. I mean, there's like no running water and there's kind of no heat. I think, yeah, they have some kind of makeshift stove that they burn wood in. You know, it's in Russia in the winter. But there's this passage. It was the lies we objected to more than the punishments, because they'd send them to this place called Shizo, capital S, capital Hizo, Shizo. I don't know what the initials stand for. It's an acronym, but it's like it's a punishment cell. Like you get fed maybe once every other day. There's no heat. They put you in a smock, like a flimsy smock. One time it was 42 degrees in there. They can't have a sweater. They can't, everything's ridden with bed bugs and lice and scabies, and you have this slop jar. Anyway, she says it was the lies we objected to more than the punishments, and this got my attention because of uh, the culture that we live in, which is a far cry from what she endured. But I do think we sense that we are ever more surrounded by lies. It was the lies we objected to more than the punishments. It's impossible to tolerate brazen lies told straight to your face. Human nature rebels against it. What is the worst thing in the camps? I asked Tatiana at the end of my first week in the small zone. That was what their political prisoner was called, the small zone. And she, who had already experienced Shizo and such like many times, answered without a moment's hesitation, the perpetual lies. So they lie to you about just everything right to your face. No, it's 85 degrees Fahrenheit in here when it's 32 degrees. Um, they were allowed one long visit, which I think was 2 to 3 days from a friend or family member per year, and then two smaller visits, which were maybe a few hours, and they were constantly your family member or husband would be right in the verge of visiting, and they'd find some, oh, you didn't, I found a speck of dust on your bed. Sorry, you won't get to see your husband after all this year. Um, but they go on hunger strikes together. They will not wear the identity badge, and because the government knows that they have some way of smuggling out this information to the outside world, and Russia doesn't want the world to know that it's guilty of these hideous human rights abuses. So the political prisoners actually have a little bit of power in numbers. Um, so here's the thing that that really got my attention, though. I mean, among many other things, she finally got out. kind of part of detente or whatever when Gorbachev came to power, and she got out after serving almost 4 years. She almost died in her last. She did like weeks and weeks in Shizo, and but she got out. She came to the U.S. actually, and I think taught at Northwestern. She died at 63 of cancer, and of course today is barely remembered as this is it. You know, these flames that burn during their time on earth, and then it seems like our job is just, or their job, or whoever is or wants to be desperately a flame, and then the flame dies out, and the but you've lit the next person's flame, like those candles on Christmas Eve when you pass your candle around, kind of. But this is the thing that okay, so at one point they think they've seen the worst, but no, they launched into a second pogrom, which made the first one seem trivial by comparison. All letters and any documents were taken away for yet another scrutiny. They just came in and just like swept through their little scanty quarters, starting with Raya's underpants and ending with bits of my embroidery. They took everything. For some reason, they confiscated Galia's Bible. And then they threw Pani, P-A-N-I, Jadvija's, Jadvyga is her name. These are her um, roommates, if you will, her fellow prisoners. They threw Pani's communion wafers on the floor and ground them into dust with their boots. They stole her rosary with a cross. So she goes on for a bit. And then Pani, whose communion wafers were stolen, feels that she has committed a great sin, weak and ill though she is, by being unable to save her communion wafers, which had been blessed in Lithuania, from desecration. All our attempts to convince her otherwise prove useless. Only a priest can absolve her, she says, and priests aren't allowed in the camps. So Pani decides to do penance. She makes a vow of silence for a year. We could see nothing that would dissuade her. The only concession we were able to win from our inflexible Pani was a promise that she would write when necessary instead of speaking. And she keeps, the KGB goes insane because they don't know how to deal with her. There's no code that says you have to speak. It's like Bartleby the Scrivener, that incredible Melville, Herman Melville, um, I guess a novella or long short story, where I would prefer not to. She just opts out, just refuses to speak, doesn't do, they go nuts. But true to her vow, and so she gets punished, they throw into, but she will not budge. True to her vow, she even remained silent throughout a meeting she was granted with her son. She did not utter a single word from August 19th, 1985 until August 19th, 1986. When she moaned in her sleep, even then without words, we could hear how her voice changed through disuse. It became dull and hoarse. So this, and when I read this, I couldn't help but compare it to, or brought to mind these kind of celebrity first communions that we're seeing these days, where it's like a photo opportunity, it's a marketing opportunity. That to me, just, I'm absolutely scandalized by this kind of, it just seems to me to be, I mean, it wrong on every level, like aesthetically wrong, as wrong as it would be to like have a camera in your, the marital, trained in the marital bed. I mean, my goodness, this is like the intrusion of the city of man into the city of God. It's like, good heavens, this is something so private and so sacred. So, um, and here's a real activist. also, you know, we hear everyone's an activist, except activists, the activists we have seem to me to, again, it's like it's a marketing opportunity. It's a way to make a name for yourself and get, but these people, these women, man, and they didn't know if they were going to die in there, and some of them did, but that, yeah, and to feel so deeply about the Eucharist that you would do when it wasn't remotely her fault, like the KGB came in and just stamped these beautiful consecrated hosts, but she did a year's penance. So, uh, you know, it brings into sharp focus what we say before we receive the Eucharist. Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. And boy, when you read about real courage and integrity and what people have done for the Eucharist and what people are doing now around the world, like would you be so thrilled to have a camera on you as you're receiving the Eucharist if you lived in Nigeria, for example, right now, or any number of places where people are being hideously abducted and tortured. And so, but always there are these flames. And that's what I and we all, and you know, I'm like encouraging myself because it's very easy to. And then of course I'm like the hugest, you know, it always comes back to like I am the hugest hypocrite and coward and etc. ever. So, but this brings me to the other book I'm reading, and I haven't finished it yet. Father Donald Haggerty. Some of you may know him. They have he's in New York, and I think he's at St. Patrick's uh, Cathedral. They sometimes have excerpts of his work in Magnificat, and I don't know him. I don't even know what he looks like, but I always love his reflections. He's kind of hardcore in the best possible way, but his is wonderful. Oh, first of all, he starts each chapter with some epigraphs, and I love this one from Simone Weil. Isn't it the greatest possible disaster when you are wrestling with God not to be beaten? I'm kind of like, is that even possible? Because anytime I've wrestled with God, yeah. Um, but it goes to this kind of, we talked about this last week a little bit apropos of Into Great Silence, that wonderful documentary, and the quote about you seduced me, Lord, and I let myself be seduced. But when I got the book, and who knows? I mean, I don't buy books willy nilly, but I was ordering some book, and you know how they do. They go, "Oh, you might like this book," and so I see, oh, conversion, always a hugely delicious topic for me. And then by Father Donald Haggerty, I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to read more of his stuff, so I bought it. It's not super long, but I opened the book at random, and here's the paragraph, and I just, as usual, sort of melted into. I just said, yes, that is totally it. And this kind of goes to the great gift of having come into the church as a huge prodigal daughter, you know, like very, and I mean, it's all a grace, but like so clear. This was not an intellectual thing. This was like, really, am I not like damned to hell for eternity for the stuff that I have done? Um, really, you're going to let me back? So anyway, here's the paragraph. Father Donald Haggerty, getting trapped and mired. And he's talking about what a gift, in a way, this can be. The Felix culpa, right? The happy fall. Getting trapped and mired in serious sin for an extended time is for some people never separated from a need after a serious conversion to give their life completely to God. Conversions in these lives do not just provide some restoration to normality, because if you're like me, you didn't have a normal to start with. The sins of the past do not recede into vague, distant memories. In these people, a conversion retains a youthful presence, even after long years, a never exhausted urging felt in the soul to give continually more to God. From the outside, perhaps it might look as though a reaction to guilt drives such lives, but because it doesn't, at least not after, you know, quite a long period of time when you kind of worked it through or can believe you've been forgiven. But anyway, but this psychological interpretation neglects the more interesting truth. In every age, there are souls whose desire for God is intense because of their previous sins. The years they lived forsaking God accentuate the shock of this rescue. What follows is lifelong astonishment at God's mercy. That is totally it. It's just every day, really. um, as what follows is lifelong astonishment at God's mercy, as if he loved in this manner only in rare instances, and they have been so favored. And it's like, yes, you nailed it. That is exactly it. You're like, I can't believe he has been this merciful to this bad a sinner. And you really do feel, not that, you're like, I'm special or different or anything like that, but it's just like, it is like a shock and astonishment. Um, Divine mercy remains for them a first love, never abandoned, and this love affects everything in their subsequent lives. Not surprisingly, many of these souls follow a road that takes them increasingly toward deeper prayer, and their prayer has a common quality no matter what their external lives display. They learn soon to pray. And this is kind of this is the road ahead of me. Um, Evermore, because I think, anyway, they learn soon to pray with great charity in intercession for souls like themselves who need also to receive the anonymous favor of a silent benefactor's pleading for a soul's conversion. So that's the path. It's kind of an objective, like this is the path for many, many, many. Um, you're never treading the path for the first time. And I think for me, it's just taken so long. I have all kinds of disordered parts in my my psyche and my soul and the way that I think I think it's for a lot of my life it was just I'm just treading water. I'm just trying to get I desperately want to give my all, but it's like it's hard, like I'm self-absorbed without meaning to be or wanting to be in a way, or have been for a lot of my life. And so I think, whatever these huge, invisible, mysterious graces that are granted, that's absolutely this whole phenomenon of becoming an oblate and deeper, deeper, wanting to order my life more to prayer. That's it. It's not for yourself. Of course, you reap the benefit, but it's outward. The movement's outward. So anyway, that is way more than enough. Gray is the color of hope. Irina Rathushinskaya. Can't recommend it highly enough. And Father Donald Haggerty's conversion. And there you go. Okay. See you next week.